morning, everyone, and welcome back to another PorscheCooled Podcast. It's Saturday night here in Bahrain. The podcast today is going to be slightly different to the last 20 podcast episodes that you've listened to on this podcast channel. Today we have another Porsche enthusiast, a very good friend of mine, Steve, and Steve and I are going to be chatting about owning your first Porsche, owning a 911. We're going to talk about our story, about his story, about the cars that he has owned. He's actually owned three generations of 911, so he's got a lot more to talk about, I'm sure, than me. But before we get into it, this is a PorscheCooled Podcast. I'm Michael Barth. This podcast is an extension of my YouTube channel, which is simply Michael Barth. And we also have a Instagram, PorscheCooled. Make sure you follow that. It's just simply PorscheCooled. Lots of great images of Porsches. And what else? Our love of Porsche. This podcast is all about our love of Porsche. We talk about Porsches. It's Porsche-centric channel. And that's where it all begins. So let's get into the episode today. I'll stop talking to myself and we'll try to get Steve on the line via Zoom. He's all the way over in Australia. It's very early in the morning there, and it's late in the evening here, but we somehow tied this up, so let's see how we can do the very first episode of the PorscheCooled Podcast with special guest Steve, who owns a GT3, my good mate from Sydney. Okay, so I've got my friend Steve here. Steve's joining the podcast. He's going to join the podcast for hopefully the next few episodes, if he doesn't get sick of it quickly.
I'll try not to mess it up.
But so Steve's on. We've got a Zoom call going here. Hopefully the sound quality is okay. Steve's in Sydney. It's very early in the morning, and I'm in Bahrain, as I said before. And today we're going to talk about your first Porsche, or even your first 911. And to give you a bit of a lead in, like I said, Steve has owned three generations of Porsche 911s. He's owned a 964, a 993, and a 997. That's correct, right, Steve? Only three?
Yeah, that's right. Yep, sure is.
And the 964 was the first one. The 964 was, I think, 20 years ago.
Oh, you're aging me massively? I don't know. Yeah, it was a long time ago. A very long time ago, before they were actually cool.
Yeah, so Steve got a 964, I think, and the car he had before that was the S3.
Audi S3?
Yeah, yep. Audi S3, which he bought, I think, new. Is that correct?
Yep, probably one of the very few cars that I had ever bought brand new, and brilliant car, like really cool car. I was a serial kind of car buyer in terms of I'd get the itch, buy a car, have fun with it, kind of get a little bit sick of it a couple of years later, flip it, get something new. And I reckon one of the interesting things about Porsches, I sort of say this to mates all the time, is that if you want to stop the itch, buy a Porsche, buy a 911. Because once you do that, well, I suppose you might itch for the next 911, but the itch goes away. Well, I reckon it does.
I remember when you got the S3, actually, I thought it was very, very cool. It was at the time, that was a 2000 model, right? Or 99, or when they first generation S3, which were, I remember they were pretty cool at the time. They were expensive. I remember they were very expensive and they were very cool.
Very much so.
And then I actually had an A3. I had the A3 1.8 turbo, which was not as cool, which was around the same time you had the S3.
Yep.
But what I remember about the 964, and I just tell everyone listening, what I remember about the 964, I remember when I first saw it, and I was working in Paddington in Sydney, and I went outside and had a look at it, and I remember looking at it thinking, yeah, it's very cool, and I know the shape, and I didn't know much about 964s. In fact, I probably knew nothing about a 964, but I thought it was a good looking car. But the only thing I remember, and I think I said this to you the other day, is that I thought the bumper was very big. Like it had some kind of, the bumper shape was unusual at the time. It's weird though. When I look at it now, I think it's actually a very attractive 911. I don't actually think it's ugly at all. I think it's actually aged quite well.
Well, see, that's funny because I guess I can say this because I'm a sort of owner and all that sort of stuff, or an ex-owner. But when I got that car, it was the only sort of 911. I really wanted a 911. I kind of got it. My family, my uncle's like a mad car person. He had a 88 Carrera, and then he upgraded to a 993. Sort of German cars runs in the blood sort of thing through my family. So I just sort of, I can't even remember. I think he may have kind of spotted it in those days. You'd kind of buy cars through the classifieds. He spotted it in sort of like a small kind of car dealership on Parramatta Road. People in Sydney will sort of understand the connotation of that.
I thought it was Des Moines. I thought you got it from one of those dealers on Des Moines there.
That's where I thought, Victoria Road. Yep.
Is it Victoria Road, right? It was one of those, whatever,
Victoria
I can't remember the name, that guy that used to have all the imported cars. And
I can, but it's probably better not to name names anyway.
Yeah.
But it was super low mileage. Like it had, and it was a 1990 white C4, navy, like the dark blue interior. But it only had, I think it was about 36,000 K, which was really sort of low mileage back in that time. And I was in the S3. My uncle kind of encouraged me to go for like a little look and sort of test drive and spin. The inevitable thing happens because you kind of, once you drive the thing, it's all over. You pretty much, can't sleep until you're in it. I'm pretty sure you'd understand that.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, that's sort of how I kind of got into it. But
See, I do actually
remember sort of at the time, and I still think this, like that was the only Porsche that I could kind of get into. My uncle sort of said, don't go for anything older than that because it's a bit trickier to drive. And at this point in time, it sort of still is. It's my only car. So I couldn't afford to kind of drive something too old and too vintage that I couldn't really sort of daily. So given that the 964 was one of the first 911s with sort of power steering, things like that, the gear shift wasn't kind of too clumsy and too clunky.
Yeah.
I remember trying to drive his old Carrera, and that was like really, really, I found it really hard to kind of find the gears in that. So...
But see, what's quite interesting is when you bought that 964, I won't mention it, but I have a vague idea of how much you paid for it, right? I vaguely remember you telling me how much you paid for it. But at the time, a Carrera, like an air-cooled Carrera, was actually 85, the earlier models, the 80 models, they were actually a lot cheaper, weren't they? They were a lot cheaper than the 964, so they were half the price. But I think what you said is really interesting is that thing about some of the earlier 911s being a little bit twitchy, right? Being a little bit harder to drive.
It is harder to drive. I drove my uncle's like once. The night before he basically traded his 85 Carrera in for his 993, he came over and he sort of said, son, jump in the car and go for your life. Do whatever you want because, this is the last night I've got it. And he sat in the passenger seat. I jumped in. I think I was in, can't remember. I was probably in the S3 or maybe a WRX or something like that. So that's what I was used to driving.
Yeah.
Got in his car, really excited, loved the noise, all that sort of stuff. We were just driving around the neighborhood and I didn't have that much fun because I couldn't change gears. I couldn't find the gears every time I kind of shifted from, first to second, trying to kind of get from second to third. I couldn't really get it going because I was too busy kind of rowing around trying to find the gears in the thing.
Yeah.
So that was actually my actually very first 911 drive, and it probably wasn't that great. It's more a reflection of me than the car. Admittedly, I know the car needed. I'm pretty sure my uncle sort of said that it needed a new gearbox, but whatever.
But I guess after driving that, you knew when you went for a drive in the 964 that you were happy to take the 964, right? Because you had that memory of driving the 80s one, so you knew that the 964 was still a better experience.
Yeah. And it's a great car. But, I mean, the thing that I was going to say was that it makes me laugh because it really was the only 911 that I could really kind of afford that was sort of, suitable for my kind of needs and all that sort of stuff. And I always sort of thought that it was the ugly duckling, basically. It really wasn't, like if money was no object, and not kind of crazy kind of thing, but if I could have afforded it, easily I would have gotten into a 993, not a 964. But I couldn't afford, like at that point in time, that would have been over $100,000, which was tons of money in that day, particularly for a young guy.
Yeah. I remember when you had the 964 and you were talking about how you wanted to get a 993. I do actually remember that. You were driving the 964 and saying you'd like to get a 993 like what your uncle had. Yeah?
Yep.
I do actually remember that.
Exactly.
But,
and
I mean, the 964...
I kind of wound up in that afterwards.
I think your 964 looked good, though. I think it looked good because it was white. I think white was a good color in that car. I think it actually suited the car. I think
my first white car.
When I see it again, I think it actually suited the car. It was white, right?
Yeah. And remember, we went to one of those auto house kind of cars and coffee type things, and it was there. I'm trying to find the photo. You took a photo of me standing next to it, because that was like, I don't know, 15 years later or something like that.
Yeah, so I think it was maybe 2 years ago, Autohouse Hamilton, which a lot of people have heard me mention before, the Porsche specialist in Sydney that Steve has a very good relationship with because he's been going to them for over 20 years. But there was a Cars and Coffee, and we just happened to see, I think that Cars and Coffee, we saw your 964, and then coincidentally, the guy that bought your 993 was also at that Cars and Coffee. Remember? He was also there. So it was like both of your old cars. I mean, a lot of people own 911s in Sydney. It's not like that rare, but it was just, like mines, I guess. And there it was. There were both your cars there at the one Cars and Coffee.
And they hunt you down too, actually. I actually spoke to the guy that bought the white C4, the 964, and got chatting with him because he wanted to know about it. And later on, the same thing happened with the 993. So, I think it, like you sort of said, just people that are into cars, but specifically Porsches and 911s, you just wind up kind of chatting about it, I suppose.
Yeah. It's weird though. I always thought your 964 was a Carrera 2. I didn't know it was a Carrera 4. I actually always thought it was a Carrera 2. Yeah, so there you go. Yeah. My memory's not so great.
Look, it was a great car. Really cool car. Sound, probably one of the things that I remember the most is the sound. Even after kind of getting into a 993, which we can talk about later.
But the 964, you did quite a lot of things to it, didn't you? I mean, it's probably too much for this episode, but you did quite a lot of mods or not?
Not as much. I changed out the primary muffler. I put Bilsteins in it, which I was a sort of serial kind of believer in Bilsteins, again, through my uncle's influence. I can't remember, did some other bits and pieces. I got out of it before that model sort of had a notorious thing for not having a gasket in the heads. So it was sort of weep oil. Plus, one of the differences between a 964 and 993, I believe, is the valves need adjusting. I can't remember what the intervals are. So there's a lot more maintenance in a 964 than there is a 993.
Right. And on your 964, you did you do the Fister exhaust on the 964? Was that didn't you get something from Fister? No, it wasn't.
It wasn't Fister. Fister was in the 993. 964 had the there's two mods that you can do, like a primary or a secondary kind of muffler bypass, and I think I had the primary, and it sounded awesome. That thing sounded so good, it sounded better than the 993.
I can't remember it. I actually can't remember what the sound of it. I remember being in it, but I can't remember the sound of it. But that's what I was thinking the other day, though. Really, like the three sort of mods you want to do on a Porsche on a 911 is really exhaust, right? Suspension, and if you buy it and it's got shitty tires on it, is to put good tires on it, right? Good rubber.
Yeah,
don't
suspension,
you think?
I think suspension, it sort of depends on which one you've got. Like, I haven't touched the GT3, but which is semi-unusual for me, I suppose. But yeah, I suppose with the 964, I specifically did it because it was a C4. Not that I'm a brilliant driver, I'm not at all, but it did sort of understeer because it's sort of like forward drive, not rear wheel drive.
Right.
And the Bilsteins made a massive difference in that, in terms of just the way that it felt. It didn't sort of, it didn't sort of feel kind of super understeery. But yeah, so.
So the Bilsteins, as I said to you before, the Bilsteins are what I'm thinking of getting for my 997. So I think, and I think I told you what it was. I think it's called B12 kit or something, which is, is it EBAC Pro Kit springs and V8 shocks, so sport shocks. So not adjustable, whatever, I don't think. They're not coilovers, right? They're just normal. So that's what I'm thinking of doing on mine. So, and I guess because
I'm a big believer.
But I know
I'm a massive believer in Bilsteins, but
so
whether
what
or not
is
it's sort of like a mandatory or not, but
yeah, but what is it then that this thing, and I've noticed it on YouTube, and maybe it's just with people in the UK, why is everyone hyping up KNW, whatever it's called, especially for 996?
Don't know, but I suppose like
you think that's
KWs and Bilsteins are the sort of like two of the big sort of suspension manufacturers. And KW, is it Manti, or I'm not quite sure how to say it.
Is that Manti
Racing? Yeah, they use KWs.
Okay. So Porsche Racing.
Yeah.
Porsche own Manti, don't they? They own, that's their racing division, right?
They bought a share in it, I believe.
Because I noticed those guys, what is he? That 911 guy's got KW, hasn't he? Coilovers. I noticed that TGE guy bought KW coilovers as well. So they've gone full on. I just don't know whether that's a bit overkill. You know what I mean? That's why I was wondering why they're all sort of pushing the KW thing, but maybe it's a UK thing. Who knows?
I think the other thing about it is probably more that, you know, like anything, suspension is a sort of like, it is a long-term maintenance item. So like, I don't know how long they're supposed to last, but say you're up to kind of 80,000 K or something like that. You know, like if you're kind of enthusiastic and you're looking after the thing, then you probably want to renew them. So what are you going to do? You either have your existing ones serviced, which means kind of regassing, re-oiling them, etc., or, you know, you pay a little bit more and you kind of replace them and you upgrade them. So, you know, I know which one I'd do.
Yeah. So 964, and then you owned the 964 for, I can't even remember, how many years did you own the 964?
Oh, geez, I can't remember.
4 years?
I think I owned it maybe about that, yeah.
So in 2004, was it, you bought the 993? So when I bought my Audi Avant, I think you bought the 993. I know who made the better decision.
I'll take your word for it. Oh, that's right.
Depreciation.
You paid roughly the same price.
I paid the same, yeah. I won't actually mention the figure here, but just so everyone knows, I actually paid almost the same price as Steve did for his 993. Steve sold his 993 about the same time. Before I sold my Audi. And actually, Steve, I think you got the same amount back as you paid for the car, right?
No, I didn't. I lost, I think, about 10 grand on it.
Oh, did you?
I think I lost about 10 grand from the paying price to the selling price. But to be fair in that equation, you have to kind of factor in the maintenance money. And you don't want to know what that is.
I think the
not
scary
maintenance, but the money I put into it.
Well, that's what I was going to say. I think I remember that, and I probably shouldn't say it on this podcast, but it's the mods you did for the car, the things that you added to the 993, and then the things and the service, right? Because Steve's, I'll just tell everyone, your 993, is it still for sale? Is for sale at Autohouse Hamilton again? It came up for sale?
I think so. Yep.
And I think it's for sale for about 129,000 Australian dollars, which I thought was actually quite reasonable, sub 200,000 kilometers. It's in the best color.
Ventura green.
Yeah, that's the one. It's in the best color, and it's got lots of extras to it. I have to admit, I thought about it. I said to Tasha, I said that would be a good car to buy, and she said
I'd buy back in a second if I could.
Yeah, no, because it's just perfect. And like I said, it's you did the wheels in that sort of almost similar to my grey color, isn't it? That's the grey turbo wheels. You had them painted.
They were painted in the same color. There was a sort of anniversary edition, the Vesuvius.
Oh, that's right.
The sort of dark purple thing that had sort of dark grey wheels. So I just took that paint coat and painted those wheels that colour.
But it's funny, when we were talking about your car and you said, if you got it back, you'd probably change the wheels back to the original color, I think you said. Because I was looking at it thinking, I'd like to see the wheels back in the original color. And then I was searching on UK, I think one of the specialists in UK, and one came up, same sort of year and whatever, same color, and it had the silver wheels. And I have to admit, for some reason now, I always loved your wheels. I love that color. But for some reason now, the silver wheels look, I think, cooler on that car. I don't know why, but
everything is coming full circle.
Yeah, it just looks like the silver with the green. It's just something about it. It's just something about and it always had a great stance, that car. I always remember, when you're seeing you driving in the car park and stuff, like it always had a really nice look on the road, the 993. There was something about how it sat on the road. You know what I mean?
It was, and I know it's not all about aesthetics, but in my opinion, at least, the 993 looks so much better than the 964. It's like what we were just implying just then. I find it really interesting that 964s are so kind of sought after now, and they're so valuable, et cetera, because I just remember back in the time when I actually had one, thinking of it as a bit of an ugly duckling kind of thing, and it literally was just what I could afford. So, and I was always lusting after a 993. So,
and the thing is, when you see 964 Carreras now on sale on the site in Australia, car sales, the 964s, the ones they have, they're around 150, 160,000 for a Carrera 2.
Mm-hmm.
I think I've seen a couple there that are about 140, 150. And then I think the 993 is about similar prices. I remember I saw one that sold recently that was, yours is 130, but I did see some on there for around 140, 150. So they're kind of...
Yeah, it depends on mileage.
964, 993s are kind of, say a 993 with 100,000 kilometers is about the same price as a 964, it seems. They seem to have leveled out. But the 993 was but the 993 always seemed to be more sought after years ago, right? It is a beautiful...
Absolutely.
It's a beautiful car. It's a beautiful shape. The headlights, everything about it, the bumpers, everything's resolved.
When I owned the 993 and when I got into it, I suppose the feeling most people would sort of say, like all the kind of hype was in 993s. Maybe that was sort of the case up until about, 5 years ago, where, it was last to be air cooled. Everybody sort of seemed to prefer the looks. It's got revised suspension. It's definitely more dailyable, but it is kind of interesting because I sort of hear a few things every now and then. I can't remember who it was, but I reckon somebody sort of said it fairly accurately, which is, I think if you jump into like a bog standard 993, it sort of feels a little bit squishy and the handling isn't that sharp.
Right.
The ride is definitely kind of comfortable, I guess, by modern standards. But, like my memory of my 993 is slightly different because it was tweaked, I suppose. Like you just sort of said, once you kind of do a couple of the key things like the exhaust, so you make it sound a bit better, you bring out the kind of air-cooled note. Mine had Bilstein, the PSS9 coilover kit,
right.
which sharpened it up massively. And then you kind of do a couple of little aesthetic things. And then once you kind of tweak it a little bit, it becomes probably sharper. So that sort of comment that I remember reading recently where somebody said, it's soft and squishy, not really that much fun. It's really easy to make it a lot more fun and arguably, just a bit more engaging, I suppose.
But the thing is, how did it feel? I mean, can you remember this? When you got out of your 964 and you did minor things to your 964, but when you bought the 993, it was standard, right? It had nothing done to it pretty much. It was like
both of them
perfect...
were
Okay, but when you went out of your 964, and I know your 964 had a few things done to it, and then you jumped into your 993 when you traded in your 9964 and you bought the 993, how did it feel? What's your memory of that? Did it feel a lot different to the 964? Did it feel... Yeah,
it did. Keeping in mind that I was going from a C4, like a four-wheel drive, to effectively, not that it's called that a C2, the 993 was miles better. The ride was noticeably better. The handling was kind of just nicer. Again, I'm no driving expert. I'm not. I've got a keen interest and I'm enthusiastic, but I'm no kind of Chris Harris kind of thing. It felt just how do you put it? Sort of more sophisticated, I suppose.
Right.
You could tell that one was an older car and one had sort of, and this was back in whatever that year was, 2004. It just felt like a kind of newer, sort of bit more special kind of car, more evolved.
So your 993 was a 95 model, right?
95, yep.
And your 964 was a 90?
1990, yep.
1990, so 5 years difference.
Yep.
So here's a question, and I didn't ask you this. The day when we switched cars and I drove your GT3 for the first time and you drove my 997, and I know you drove it when we went to test drive the car. Steve came along with me and helped me with that purchase, and we went on a test drive, and then Steve, you drove it as well.
Try not to flog your car.
You just made sure the clutch was okay. But then when I drove your GT3 that day, we were on the putty road and you drove my car.
Yep.
Here's a question. How did the 997 feel compared to the 993? Did it feel to you as big a jump as when you went from your 964 to 993? And I know you only drove it my standard Carrera, because they're all base Carreras, right? They're all Carreras. Your 993 was a Carrera, your 964 was a Carrera 4.
Yep. Oh, sorry. So you asking about the comparison between, say, my 993 to your 997?
Yeah, when you drove my 997, when you drove my car on the putty road, and I think you drove it in the test drive as well, but can you think about how different it was to the 993? Was it, you know what I mean? Was it as big a jump?
Yes.
So you say the 993 is so much better than the 964, but it's the 997. I know there's a 996 in between here, but we're missing out. But
yeah, of course, because you're talking like, what year's your car? 2008. So you're going from a 95 to a 2008. And I had driven a couple of 997s before that. My cousin had one as well. I can't really remember, to be honest.
2 generations. Because I remember and I remember being in your car, but I remember more recently is when I dropped my car off at Auto House, and I think I told you this story, that they took me to they give you a lift to the train station, and they gave me a lift in the 993 they had in stock, right? Because that was the only car they had. And the first thing I noticed a difference between, because I just got out of my car, I just dropped the 997 off for service, and I got into the 993 as a passenger. First thing I thought, it felt lower, and I don't know why. And this was an auto Tiptronic 993. It felt lower to the ground.
Not the one to get. No offense to anyone out there.
Yeah, exactly. It felt lower to the ground. The smell of leather was so strong. Like, all I could smell was the leather. And then it was the petrol and the vibrations. It was definitely more intense than my car. It felt a lot more intense than my car.
So what you're describing is, like, just from my experience at least, is the difference between an air-cooled 911 and a water-cooled. Both my 964 and my 993, you've just kind of raised really fond memories. There's the smell, because it's cooled by oil, and you can just kind of smell the kind of mixture of oil, like kind of hot oil and sort of burning petrol, etc. I'm assuming the quality of the materials is kind of different too, so that leather as well. And the other one that I'd add to it is the clunk of the door. People bang on about it all the time. But the noise that the door makes when you close it and you open it,
you're right.
is
you're
so
right.
distinctive. So distinctive.
No, it felt louder inside the cabin. Like, it felt like there was less noise deadening. There was less noise, It felt louder inside the cabin as well in that 993. And that was just on a short, 5-minute, 10-minute trip to the station, basically. But it was definitely the whole experience was completely different to a 997. I can see why people want air cooled. You know what I mean? And
absolutely. If I could have both, then I'd gladly kind of have like an air cooled in the garage. if my wife's listening to this, I'm
So then,
not serious.
so then you had the 993, and then you spent lots of money on the 993 with modding it out and making it faster, lighter.
Yeah.
And then
just
you bought,
more.
and then you bought the Pinnacle. Steve bought the Pinnacle. He bought a 997.1 GT3. Everyone knows how much I want a GT3. And you bought the GT3 in 2015, was it?
14, I think.
14. Wow, time flies. Yep. 2014. So that was a pretty big leap, huh? Because price-wise, it jumped up quite a lot. I mean, obviously cheaper than what they are now.
That was an interesting one. I think different sort of personal circumstances. Hilariously, like I made the decision. I'd literally sold my 993. Scotty at Auto House kind of helped me with that. So I got rid of it in preparation for being able to kind of leap onto, the GT, like a GT3 that might pop up. I found one, put a deposit on it really quickly to kind of secure it because I'd sort of done all my homework and I figured out, what theoretically would be a good one pending PPI, etc. So found this white 997.1, what is it, a 2008 GT3 Club Sport. So it's got the roll cage, the carbon buckets in it, and this one had a few nice little extras in it. It's got the carbon interior, the xenon headlights, a few other kind of little bits and pieces. So I found a guy in Melbourne that was wanting to sell it. I remember literally I was at work and I just kind of constantly scanned car sales. It kind of came up and I pretty much rang him straight away. We had a kind of chat about it and I just sort of said, look, I'm dead serious. Like, I'm a buyer. I'll give you a deposit to kind of hold the car pending PPI. And I pretty much made the offer, I think, kind of like that afternoon. So it was just because, could be right, could be wrong, but I sort of felt like if you know what you're after and you kind of find the right car, like obviously if a PPI kind of brings up stuff, then you sort of reconsider. But if the car comes along and you sort of think that it's right, then don't wait because they're so rare. Yeah. And that would be even more so like these days, but.
Yeah, so you bought it sight unseen. I always harp on about make sure you get a PPI, pre-purchase inspection, which you did. Yep. Everything came out okay. And because the car, like you said, it was really highly spec'd, wasn't it? I mean, the leather and the carbon and everything.
For a GT3, yeah.
Yeah. No sunroof, which is good.
I think there was one that popped up in Australia recently, but yeah, I thought they were I thought they came without sunroofs. I didn't think you could get one in Australia at least. But
yeah, I saw that one come up. That's one thing that I wish my car didn't have, and I have to admit I'm a bit anti-sunroof. I'd rather not have a sunroof. You know what I mean? Like I notice when you look through used cars now in 991s like Carrera S and Carrera GTS, I think 90% of them have the glass full sunroof, which I think is just like, it just turns me off it. I just don't want a sunroof in a 911. I don't know why. I know some of the old ones, but I never use it. I never open it. I never ever use it. It probably doesn't even open anymore because I've never actually opened it, I don't think.
My 993 had one. I think my white one, the 964 had one as well. I don't mind it. I like the whole purist point of view is that it adds weight above your head and it's all in the wrong spot, blah, blah, blah. But I don't mind it as an alternative to winding the windows down and getting a bit more noise. But
I think in the 964, 993 and 997 with the metal one is okay. I just don't like that full glass thing on a 911.
I see the panoramic.
Yeah, that panoramic one. And the way it sits when it goes to the back of the car, you know how it's like that large overhang that it does. I don't know. It always looked a bit weird to me. It always seemed to destroy the line of the car. I don't know.
Yeah.
So GT3. So GT3 you still own? You haven't sold that yet? You haven't added to it as yet?
That's not going anywhere. Although I said the same thing about. I honestly thought with the 993 I was the happiest man in the world. I owned that thing for 12 years. As we sort of said, like I sunk a lot of money into that car. And no regrets, like heaps of fun. But towards the end of my ownership of that, I kind of do remember sort of thinking that the maintenance bills certainly weren't getting any smaller, but the insurance, etc. Like when you added up all the kind of bills to kind of keep the thing on the road, keeping in mind your standards, like, I think when you've kind of got high expectations of your car, you can sink tons of money into kind of keeping it just so. When I looked at that kind of equation, it's like, if that's what I'm going to pay like every year to kind of keep this thing going to that way, maybe I might sort of consider the upgrade. The sort of funny story that I was going to tell off that was when I had put the deposit down on the GT3 and I'd sold the 993. I lost my job. I was made redundant.
Oh, that's right.
So
at least you had a nice car.
Delivery of a GT3. Yeah, I took delivery of a GT3 without having a job.
Which was actually good because you had plenty of time to polish it and detail it and wax it. All the important things.
Yeah, exactly.
What else?
Yeah, but the GT3, the leap from a 993, and I'm sure it's the same. Like if you kind of went generation to generation from a 995, to a 993 to a GT3 is a massive leap.
You're going from Carrera to GT3 as well. You're not only just going from air-cooled to water-cooled, you're going like the huge leap, aren't you? From entry level to top of the level, basically. Yeah.
And I remember the first time I drove a GT3, like the one that I bought wasn't the first time. Like I'd test driven one in Sydney. I found a dealer, a local kind of dealer that was happy. When I sort of first started kind of toying around with the idea, it's like, well, I'm not going to buy a car without literally kind of knowing what it's like. And jumping in, that was a black one. That was amazing. And that didn't have the kind of bucket seats and everything. I still smile when I kind of watch the video that you took of yourself driving my GT3. And
the thing about your GT3, it's the seats and the shifter and the sound. It's the seats, the shifter, and the sound. Like you just feel like you become the car almost. You're not like you're sitting on the seat in the car, you become the car. That's the weird thing. It's like it feels completely different. It's very hard to explain unless you sit in it and drive it. And I didn't drive it hard at all. But
you jumped into a modified GT3 though, because that's not like a standard shifter and not the standard exhaust. I jumped into a standard GT3 and didn't have anything on it. And even then that thing was like amazing. The engine is so kind of, when you rev the engine out, that thing is just so cool. But yeah, anyway.
Okay. Are we done?
I don't know. Are we?
I think that's probably enough for our first podcast together. What do you think?
I'm not good at this, so
no. I think that's good. I think that's good. I think we've realized today that we have a lot to talk about. Stuff we normally just talk about by text or by text lately because being in different countries. But I think that's good. I think that hopefully everyone enjoyed the podcast today. And there will be more to come. Steve's keen to do quite a few more, aren't you, Steve?
I guess so, yeah.
So
if you get me talking about cars and everything, then like no problem. But yeah.
So I think the next one we'll talk about, we'll just give people a bit of a lead in just so that everyone gets excited about the next one when they're listening to this one. But I think the next one we'll talk about exhaust. We'll talk about making the Porsche 911 sound better. And we'll talk about, I think, your GT3, your exhaust story, because there's a lot. I know you've tried a lot of different things. And then we'll talk about my story, which I have one story which people have heard over and over, but I'm happy to tell it again. I know people like to hear it. I do get messages about people asking me about it. So people are still obviously interested in the exhaust that I did. Yours are a lot more expensive, and yours are a lot more complicated, I guess. A lot more to them.
Yeah, not necessarily expensive, but yeah.
But we won't talk about it today, but Steve has just changed his exhaust again on his car. He got it done a couple of weeks ago.
Yep, I did.
Wasn't it? A couple of weeks ago? Yep. Yeah. So a couple of weeks ago, he changed his exhaust.
Next week.
So we'll talk about that. I may actually even, if Steve sends me, I think I have the video, I might put the video of Steve's exhaust on my Instagram if he lets me, maybe.
Yeah. Yep.
And then people can hear, I might put it on one of the stories and people can actually hear the sound, because I'm sure people would love to hear what it sounds like after we've done that podcast. But I think that's it for today. What do you think, Steve? Is that it?
Yeah, all good. All good, mate. Sorry.
All right, so that's it. Thanks for listening, everyone. This is the PorscheCooled Podcast. Like I said, it's on all the major podcast platforms. You can find it on Podbean, which is the main podcast supplier. It's on Apple. It's on Google Podcasts, which they call it now. It's on Spotify. It's pretty much everywhere. Like I said, if you can't find it, just go to Google, do a search, and it will come up. Thanks for listening, and thanks to Steve for joining us today all the way from Sydney, Australia. And we'll talk again soon. Bye for now.